Yeah, people are still registering as we speak. So, all right, I think we've politely waited long enough and we're actually gonna get started. All right, so welcome everyone. Thanks for joining us for another Roebling road trip, and a big thanks to everyone who made a donation. We've had a lot of success with offering our virtual programs for free. We really want to make sure everyone who's interested can join us. So all donations of any amount really help the museum host these great programs, as well as continue to collect and preserve Roebling history. And because I'm the executive director, of course, I'm going to recommend that everyone visit our website and check out the membership options as another way you could support the museum. I've heard that being a member at Roebling Museum is the new hot thing and you should all do it. So I'm gonna drop the link in there once the program gets started in case anyone's interested. So my name is Lynn Calamia, and I'm the executive director over at Roebling Museum. I started in 2020. I have since stopped saying I'm new because it's already 2023. And these programs that we've been doing have been a big help in teaching me about Roebling history and really feeling the national perspective on the impact that they've been having. And I really hope you guys have been enjoying them too. I can see from the list that many of our attendees are actually from out of town. So for those of you who haven't yet visited, Roebling Museum is located in the former company town of Roebling, New Jersey, which is in central Jersey, right on the Delaware River. The company town is a historic district listed on the National Register. It was built in 1905, and it remains almost fully intact architecturally. I usually say during my tours, it's about 98% because one building burned down and another one was moved, but it's still there. Our museum is located on the site of the former Roebling Steel and Wire Rope Mill that produced the materials needed to build some of the most iconic suspension bridges in the United States. We have both indoor and outdoor exhibits. And if you do want to visit, I recommend coming on a Saturday because we offer really great walking tours of the company town, and I'm mainly saying that because I'm the tour guide. So you should definitely come over. If it's more than 90 degrees, I'm gonna cancel it. That's on our website. It's been real tricky in the summers. We have some great trees, but just not enough. So today we're going to go on a Roebling road trip, and for anyone who's a first timer, Roebling Road Trip is a virtual program series that takes our viewers around the country to visit with people at Roebling related sites or to talk to people who know about Roebling related history. And if you've been tuning in, we've been to a bridge in Cincinnati, the town John A. Roebling founded in Saxonburg, the Brooklyn Bridge, of course. And there's more on the way. And every time we do this, I encourage you guys to let me know what you'd like to see next. You can either send me an email or submit them in the chat or the Q&A as we go. I'm really interested in learning more about the bends, the ailment that Washington Roebling suffered from, as well as tetanus. And I'm trying to get some kind of a medical historian to come and talk to us, someone who can really speak to like a public audience, not a medical audience. So if you do know anyone, definitely give me a shout and we'll get that going. So the last thing to mention is how the program's going to run. Our guest Kathy is going to give her presentation. While she's talking, don't be shy. Submit any questions as they come to you. I'll be managing the questions and the chat. And then at the end, we're going to do a Q&A, keeping an eye on the time. So I want to keep my remarks as short as humanly possible. So let's get started. Are you ready, Kathy?
Yes, I am. So thank you, Lynn, for inviting me to do this.
Are you talking? I can't hear you.
Yes. Am I not? I should be unmuted. You can't hear me?
Wait, everyone else can hear. Just I can't hear. Okay.
Oh.
Then continue.
Okay. So welcome to 100 years of the Bear Mountain Bridge. I'm going to try my best to get it all into about 30 minutes. But this hopefully will be a good synopsis, but please don't hesitate to ask any questions. And I'd love to hear from any of you after the fact if you want some more information. We're going to get started with the history, if I can get my computer going here. Lynn, why is this not? Oh, there we go. Okay. So Anthony's Nose is there on the right side of the screen. And this was a very historic site. This was the site that's chosen eventually for the Bear Mountain Bridge, but this is where, if any of you remember your fourth grade history or whenever you studied American history, the Great Chain was hung across at exactly the same location as the Bear Mountain Bridge was built, getting into the Hudson River. Bear Mountain Bridge is also located on the exact same spot. The west approach is where Fort Clinton was. So it's a really important area. Early in the 1900s, there was a movement to move Sing Sing out of Ossining and up into the highlands. The Harrimans, who had recently bought a lot of acreage in that area for their Arden Hill estate, didn't want to see that happen. So what they did was gift parkland to the state to ensure that what's now the Bear Mountain State Park and the Harriman State Park would remain beautiful and pristine for everybody to enjoy. This was actually the first bridge that was proposed for the site where the Bear Mountain Bridge is. This was in Harper's Bazaar, Harper's Daily in 1890 as the proposed railroad bridge for that spot. It looks pretty impressive. That's not granite block. That's actually was supposed to be steel sheeting that could be removed and replaced with newer steel when necessary. But this bridge was not built, even though in this article it said that they were working on the towers. And many of you might know, I see that a lot of you are not from the area, that what actually was built instead was the Poughkeepsie Railroad Bridge, which is a much better site for a railroad. And that's now the walkway over the Hudson. So as the park began to develop, that's the Bear Mountain Inn being built right there, people started to flock to the area. And there was no way to get across from the east side to these parks from Albany all the way down to New York City unless you went by boat, which got pretty crowded. And with the advent of, or the popularity gaining of the automobile, and its price being a little bit better for people, the average person to afford, people wanted to drive to the park. And at about the same time, if I can get the right one here, this is what they're going to propose for the Bear Mountain Bridge. Terry and Tench were building their steel construction company. We're up the Hudson River in Kingston, just completing actually the Wirt Street Bridge over the Rondell Creek in Kingston. That was built by Terry and Tench, one of the larger steel construction companies of the time, with Roebling, and a lot of the same engineers that they brought south when they decided they wanted to build the Bear Mountain Bridge. They went to the Harrimans with the idea. Mary Harriman didn't want to pay for the bridge outright, so Roland Harriman's there of Mary's children put together the Bear Mountain Hudson River Bridge Company and got together with a lot of stakeholders and got enough money to build the bridge. And this was the application here, the proposed suspension bridge site. This is from 1922. This is an amended one that was in January of 23. Notice that it was approved by the, this one or the other one, by the Assistant Secretary of War. The clearance for the ships was the main concern. But you can see a lot of the information about the bridge. So the contract to build the bridge was signed on March 24th, 1923. It took a little bit less than 20 months to actually build the Bear Mountain Bridge. It opened on November 26th, 1924. So it was a pretty impressive build. One side note, if you're interested in a really good bridge talk, you should check out Blaise Blayback's talk on the Rondout on the Ward Street Bridge. That was last month's Roebling road trip. And Roebling worked with Terry and Tench, and they were also here, very instrumental in the Bear Mountain. This is one of the anchor pits. Notice the date on the bottom. This is from November of 23. Remember, we said that the contract was signed in March of 23. So here we have the anchorage pit that's being dug. And then there wasn't any construction yet on the bridge. So that's even more impressive that it was that little amount of time to actually build the entire structure. So what the unique thing about the Bear Mountain Bridge and one of the things that made it so special, it was built at one of the narrowest parts of the Hudson River, of the southern section anyway, south of Albany. So they were able to put the piers on the land. That really saved a lot of time under the construction. One tower, the foot of one tower, actually the southwest side was slightly in the water, so they had some support to do on that one. And here they are putting the cap on top of the pier to begin to build the tower. So with a suspension bridge, they build the towers. They get those all the way up. This is the East Tower. You can see in all of these photos on both sides of the river are railroad tracks. So they had to be very careful not to obstruct the traffic on the tracks. This is the tower. Another unique thing about the Bear Mountain Bridge, it's suspended in the center only between the towers. The side spans are truss and self-supporting. So here we are ready to string the footbridge cables, which will be used for the workers to walk on as they string the main cables. And here we are, as you can see, in April of 1924. So that little barge goes across the river and back to string the footbridge cables. You can see the wire cables that run up to up over the tower, hang down the center and back down the other side. And what they're going to do is weave planks to create this walkway. And you can see they're starting that at the top of the tower now. And these are, as I said, the railroad tracks there. They utilize those to move a lot of the materials. Most of the things that were used to build the bridge, all those materials, the steel was lifted up from the river. So now you can see the footbridge is in place, the towers are up, the footbridge is in place, and the approaches are built sufficient enough to bring the materials out. There's your Roebling cables. Roebling actually did a study on building of Bear Mountain Bridge and the stringing of the parallel wire cables. And I could send anybody who's interested a digital copy of that study. Lynn actually attended our centennial ceremony we had where we buried a time capsule to celebrate the signing of the construction contract and the beginning of construction of the bridge, and placed an original leather-bound copy into our time capsule. But it's a really fascinating report, and it tells all about how the Roeblings proposed to do this with this kind of a length. The bridge main span at the time was the longest suspended span of any bridge in the world. It was at 1,623 feet wide, the span was, and it's only suspended from the center. But they did a lot of study on the forces and how many wires were needed and the best way to lay them and all those kind of things, and how they're clustered, and all kinds of report then from me explaining it as I'm not an engineer. Another reason to Blaze Blabeck's his road trip on the Wirt Street. That was fascinating. So this is a report from Leopold, the resident engineer, to Howard Baird. Howard Baird is the person who designed the bridge. And what he did, as you can see, it's really pretty detailed, all on one piece of paper. It's dated July of 24. And what he was doing was giving a reporting of the number of people that were needed on each of the places, each location of the cable. So that's their, it's kind of interesting as you look at all that. So this is a spinning shed. And what they would do is they would take the spools of cable, as you could see right there, and it would run up over the top of the towers and down to the other anchorage and tie it into the anchorage, bring it back up over the other side. So they would end up with eventually a bit more than 7,000 cable wires per main cable, but they were also clustered. So they were clustered together, and then everything was compressed. And you'll see those pictures in just a minute. So this is the footbridge. It's actually much wider than it looks from a distance. And that's person right there is standing right next to a cluster of the cable wires. You can see 4 of them right there. And this is one of the approaches, excuse me, one of the side spans of the bridge. If you can see in the distance there, that ship was a replica of the Half Moon, which I thought was pretty interesting. I had seen that. I have no idea why it was there in 1924 from the 1907 centennial at that time. Okay, so, and then in the distance from that is the 9W bridge, which was actually there before the Bear Mountain Bridge was. So once they had the main cables all strung and they were ready to hang the suspender ropes off of the main cable, and the suspender ropes would come down and they would lift the stringers up from the water and attach them, and that's what the bridge would sit on. So as they did it, they would start from each end of the bridge and meet in the middle. And you can see there's so many things to notice in these construction photos. And there they are, just about ready to meet in the middle. There's a barge below that they're lifting all the metal up from the river. And then they're here compacting. These guys are compacting the cable. It needs to be really tightly compact. It's the strength is much more, it can have much more force on it the tighter it is compacted. And here's the anchorage. This is one of the west anchorages. What they'll do now, as you can see, so the main cable is coming in to the bottom left there. And as it comes down, you can see they pull it off and it's split into clusters. Those clusters are attached to I-bars, which are attached to more I-bars, which are attached to more I-bars. And then the whole thing is cemented deep into the ground. So that's what they're going to do there. Okay, so now we're cementing on the roadway. So much to see, so many people working there. A lot of visitors to the bridge this day. As you can see, I actually have a photo. Frederick Tench brought his daughter to work one day, and there's a picture of the two of them up on the tower. But we're saving that for, we're doing a documentary. HBHV is doing a documentary on 100 years of the Bear Mountain Bridge. And here we are, they're ready to cement. Notice the dates on these. This is October of 1924. And the bridge will open in about a month. So once they have the cable all done, they're going to put this, they put the saddle on top. You'll see that in later pictures. So now this is kind of a treat. I'm not going to show you the whole thing. This is, we have the full video on our Centennial site. It's bmb100.com. But we'll just take a quick look. This is a newsreel that we found in the University of South Carolina. And this is supposed to be outtakes, but it's pretty wild to watch these people jumping around. And if you can believe it, not a single person died building this bridge. All right, I think we're going to stop it there. If you watch the whole thing, you'll be pretty amazed to see that the cameraman is actually up on the bridge along with these guys with a tripod and one of those old movie cameras where he's spinning it around, cranking it around. So it's pretty amazing. So while they're building the bridge, they also had to build the what's called the goat trail by most people. It's the east approach that comes in from Peekskill, and it goes around Anthony's Nose. And Anthony's Nose is sheer rock. And as you can see, the railroad tracks below, it was a challenge to build this roadway, literally break the rock to get, carve it right out of the mountain. And you can see they would attempt to put retaining walls. It was pretty incredible. They did have compressors and jackhammers, but it was a lot of hard work. Here's another view. This is from the west side of the river looking across, and you can actually see it literally looks like it was carved right out of the side. And it's a 3.5 mile long roadway that ends up down by Ansville Circle and Peekskill. And that's even better picture there as the bridge is nearing its completion. And the road was nearing its completion. The road was actually built by a guy named Belknap. He was out of Peekskill, and he was the first person to drive a car across the bridge. And he did that just about on October 18th. So as you can see, he would come down this roadway and go across. the bridge. That was kind of a big deal. He was the first guy to drive across. So here you can see there's still a lot of people working on the bridge, the footbridge there underneath the cables. At this point, the saddles are not yet on top of the bridge. And it's about a month from opening day. I like this image because it shows you, this is the railroad tunnel that's on the west shore, but you can see this is what they were mimicking. There was a lot of concern that the Bear Mountain Bridge was going to be this metal ugly thing in the middle of this beautiful wilderness. And one of the things that they did was arc the where the automobiles go through in the tower to kind of mimic a tunnel opening. And another thing that they did was to make sure that the view was unobstructed, and that's where the cable dips below the roadbed. This is opening day. All of these people, or many of them, met in Peekskill at the railroad station. A lot of them came up out of the city, and they came around the GO Trail and stopped at the east side of the bridge to cut the ribbon there, and then proceeded across the bridge. Those guys at the front of the bridge, or the front of the traffic up there, are the West Point Band, and they led the way. This was not open to the public. This was by invitation only, special ceremonial opening that was mostly for the Harrimans, the Bear Mountain Hudson River Bridge Company, and of course, dignitaries. And here they are at the west side of the bridge. That's the toll booth there that's covered with the bunting. And here we have Mary Harriman, and she's removing the banners from the plaque. That plaque is right there set in the administration building. The only problem was the administration building wasn't built at that time. And as you can see, if you look at the top of the picture, you can see some workmen's feet. They literally put up the walls that were needed to put the plaque in, just so they can open it. And then here we have the Model Ts coming across the bridge. Now, the bridge was pretty popular, but they didn't make a lot of money initially. And in all fairness to the Harrimans, access to the bridge was nowhere near what it was in 1940 when the bridge is over. This is the bridge circle. As you can see, it's pretty rough in this area. This is a beautiful approach. This is coming down 9D. If you know the area, Cold Spring is north of here. And this is one of the ways to access the bridge. And that's what the administration building looked like in November 1st of 1924. And they got to work building it, and it was finally completed by the next spring. So the toll was collected going across the bridge in this direction. Tolls were much higher back then, if you can believe that. I know people complain about tolls. It was 80 cents for the car and the driver. Any additional passengers was another 10 cents each. Children, you charged 5 cents for them. There was a charge if you were a farmer and you were taking your animals across the bridge. So the toll was pretty expensive, and you paid both ways. So you paid on the west side, and you paid, this is the toll house that was over at the other end of the goat trail. One of the stories is that they needed this toll all the way out here to pay for insurance on the goat trail, that it was that treacherous. But there was a toll collector who not a toll collector, an assistant bridge manager who lived in this house, and the bridge manager lived in the other, in the administration building. And the man that lived in here, his name was Manthe, and he had worked for the Harrimans on their railroads, and they asked him to come to the Bear Mountain Bridge, and he was at the Bear Mountain Bridge for 47 years. And he retired at age 70, not very happy he had to retire, but he loved that bridge. This is the West Point band, or I'm sorry, the West Point plebes that are coming across the bridge. This is back before they had other areas around West Point to do their regular marches on, and they would come across the bridge. And this is the summer after the bridge opened. This is a wonderful photo. We've been working with, Historic Bridges has been working with Frank Adair, who is the Peekskill historian. Peekskill, he basically runs the Toll House Visitor Center. The Toll House was, getting ahead of myself here, the Toll House on the west side is where the Visitor Center is located. And as you can see, Bear Mountain Park was an extremely popular place to be. There's the Bear Mountain Bridge in the background, and all these people are there for winter sports. Initially, the park was primarily for the summer sports and spring sports, but they, with the bridge and people being able to get there more readily, it was a booming place. So they had the inn, and they had camping and all kinds of lodges and things like that. So in 1940, the Bridge Authority took over the Bear Mountain Bridge. They acquired the Bear Mountain Bridge. In the original charter with the Bear Mountain Hudson River Bridge Company, there was a clause basically that the state of New York could take over the bridge after a period of time. So that's Addison Jones there. He was the chairman of the Bridge Authority Board at that point in 1940. And the gentleman that's just sitting to the right with the dark hair of that pole is Robert Moses. And he was the commissioner of the New York State Parks. And he was instrumental in making sure that the Bridge Authority would acquire the Bear Mountain Bridge. There were a number of people in the area, not so much people, but the local municipalities were not happy because the Hudson River Bridge Company was a private concern. And as a private concern, they paid taxes to the local municipalities. Once the state took over the bridge, that no longer happened. So there was a lot of attempts by those municipalities to recover those funds, and that didn't happen. The other thing was that the Bridge Authority they were established in 1932 to build fund the building of the Rip Van Winkle Bridge, and they had taken over the Mid-Hudson Bridge. So the Bear Mountain was now added to the Mid-Hudson Bridge and the Rip Van Winkle Bridge. This is the mayor of Peekskill and the mayor of Newburgh. In 1940, with the transfer of the Bear Mountain Bridge, at the same time was the opening of the new Storm King Highway, the one that comes directly goes from Newburgh down to the Bear Mountain Bridge. So in 1940, bridge, they're required by law to charge the same tolls on all their bridges. The thing they did was lower the toll to 50 cents each way, which was the toll on the Mid-Hudson and the Rip Van Winkle, and they closed the East Toll House. Now, this toll house was refurbished and reopened under Governor Pataki as the Toll House Visitor Center. and it's a wonderful place to visit. So here we are, and you're probably wondering why it says car toll 25 cents. In 1945, the Bridge Authority, concerned that people weren't able to pay for the tolls, reduced the toll from 50 cents each way to 35 cents each way, and eventually to 25. This is a toll house that replaced the old one. This was built in 1993, and the Bridge Authority did a great job making it resemble the other structures, the other buildings, the administration building. So they did such a good job that when they took it down a couple of years ago to put up the gantry for cashless tolling, people were very upset, saying you can't take down a historic structure. But it wasn't historic. It was barely 20 plus years old. And then they put up the gantry, took down the toll booth. The thing that makes the Bear Mountain Bridge so unique, I believe, is that it's in such great shape at 100. And the only reason it's in this great shape is because of the Bridge Authority. The Bridge Authority does the daily maintenance, really. Maintenance workers, if you're on any Bridge Authority bridge, you will see maintenance workers on the bridges almost every day. And they're checking things, and they're checking to make sure that there aren't any issues. Their motto is maintenance deferred is maintenance denied, that you take care of the little things before they become the big things. They're out there. This particular doesn't happen very often, this one here, but this is an interesting picture. It's where they're checking the cables, and what they do is they unwrap certain sections, different ones each time, of the main cables to see if there's any that are, how many cable wires have broken. And they don't do it too often because that would be counterproductive. It's coming down from there, and they have a subcontractor that comes in and does that. And this is what I was talking about with the maintenance workers that are out on the bridge. They check, they do wash the bridges every spring. They do the spot painting. They check to make sure that the bridge is moving properly. Bridges are made to move, and if it can't move, there's something wrong. So they'll make sure they check everything. So we did have, as I mentioned previously, we had a time capsule that we buried to celebrate the beginning of the construction of the bridge. And this is where we had that ceremony. This is the back of the administration building. You can see the bridge there in the background. And we had a lot of dignitaries come. It was a very nice ceremony. And we put a lot of things into the time capsule that people will see in 100 years. This gentleman here is the longest employed person by the Bridge Authority, John Brooks, started in the early 1960s. He retired at least 3 times and keeps coming back, and he works part-time. So he was chosen to close the time capsule. So I have a special treat for you. I'm going to have to, let me get out of this. As I had mentioned also, that the Historic Bridges of the Hudson Valley is working with a filmmaker, and we're creating a documentary to celebrate the first 100 years of the Bear Mountain Bridge. And that should be out next year. And that filmmaker is Scott Snell Imagery. And Scott created a special drone video for me to share with you. And I think you're going to enjoy it. Let me just a little misty. Believe it or not, that's those Canadian wildfires. But this is the goat trail. And you're coming along the goat trail. Remember, I said it's 3.5 miles long. And it kind of winds around the mountain. Come out onto
I don't
the
think
bridge.
that we're seeing it.
You
Okay.
can't see it? Did I not?
We're still seeing your PowerPoint.
Oh, no. All right, hang on.
I want to see that goat trail.
I know. Let me, here. Did I do it?
Yes.
Good. Okay. Let me get you back to the goat trail. Hang on. Up. Okay. So this is that 9W bridge. That we're going over right now first. Problems with the abutment area on that bridge from that flooding we just had. But this is the GO trail. So we went from northwest of the bridge. Now we're southeast of the bridge. Coming along the GO trail. And as you can see, that rock, that cliff face is right there along that inside side of the road. There's a number of overlooks. It really is a beautiful section of New York State. Many people think it's the prettiest section of New York State. And here's the bridge. And there's that arched funnel-like area that you go through as you're driving. And you can see that it's only suspended in the center. You can see the suspender ropes, and it's has what's called unloaded backstays. So they're much straighter. They really just bend a little bit under their own weight, not on the weight of the bridge. And this is a quick view. So you can see where the bridge fender ropes come down and attach to the stringers that are holding up the bridge. So it's just an amazingly beautiful. And as we get to the center of the bridge, you can see where it dips down. Believe it or not, a couple of osprey built a nest on top of the tower. I don't know if it's still up there with the storm we had. Now we're looking at a few little rust spots. Most of them, as you can see, a lot of it's been painted, which protects the metal or the steel until the whole bridge can be painted. And that's going to happen to make sure it should be done by the end of next summer to make sure it's beautiful for its 100th birthday. We are directly over the bridge. The railroad tracks. This is the east side. It's such a beautiful structure, and having seen those construction photos, now it will literally. And Scott added pictures of these are the guys that are out on the bridge, and they're doing touch-up paint. This is coming over the top of Anthony's nose. It's just incredible, isn't it? And you can see Bear Mountain Park over there. Okay, and that's about it, Lynn. I think we got a little bit more of a view coming up as this follows the boat. It'll turn around and you'll see it from the south or from the north. And perfect timing, a train comes by, which is lovely. So I know I probably left out a lot of my notes here. One of the things I didn't mention was that we're having, the Bridge Authority is hosting the International Cable Supported Bridge Operators Conference at West Point in October of 2024. As part of the celebrations for the centennial of the Bear Mountain. The ice dock was started by Bill Moreau, who was there's that train, who was the chief engineer of the Bridge Authority, previous one. He's retired now. And Bill was the first person to get that group together. And what they do is they come from all around the world, and it's bridge suspension and cable bridge operators and owners. And they discuss ways that they can care for their bridges, whatever issues they are, and it's a very productive time. And it was at the Bear Mountain in 2000, and it's going to be back here again. So let me get back to, we'll just put this up here. Whoop. If I can see, okay. So do we have questions?
All right, questions are starting to come in. Michael asks, is there anything left of the 9W bridge? I think he's referring to the storm. Am I?
Oh,
is that
yeah.
what he is referring to?
Yeah, there is. You know, it's kind of confusing. There's so many bridges. It says it leads to West Point, but I believe they're talking about the one that's between Fort Montgomery and the bridge circle that goes over the Popolopen. And the concern is the washout around the abutments. So it's not open now. It's pretty much of a mess. West Point, I think, got the worst of it, but a lot of Orange County is in you know, in need of some serious help really fast. The bridge is fine. They just have to make sure that it's secured at the abutments. It's what it sounds like. So.
All right, this one's going to be difficult. It is for me because I'm not an engineer. Phoebe's asking, I've heard that concrete, especially rebarred concrete, has a life expectancy of about 100 years, especially if that concrete is exposed to water. Is the original concrete still in place holding the cables, or have the cables been reinforced in some manner?
Yes, the original concrete is there, and I'm just gonna, you know, I'm not an engineer either, but there's concrete that's exposed to the elements, and this concrete is buried. So my understanding, it's a little bit different. They do, and by they, I mean the Bridge Authority. That's one of the things that they do is go in and check in the anchorages. We have, one of the things that Historic Bridges has done is set up a museum and classroom space in that garage area that you could see from the centennial picture, that we do classes and visits in there. And there's access to the anchorages, and they go in and they check that. And the most important problem, I guess, would be at where the cable goes into the concrete, not so much within the concrete. And I could be wrong, but I'm sure you'll see it on Blaze's Roebling road trip for the Wirt Street. That was one of the significant problems, was where the steel cable was coming into the concrete. And it was in serious condition, and that's not the case with the Bridge Authority. It's in great shape. So I don't know if that answered the question.
I think so.
Okay.
Does the name Blair Birdsall and Steinman Engineering mean anything to you? If so, would you talk about their connection to the Bear Mountain Bridge? Blair Birdsall was the engineer from Roebling. And if I'm saying that wrong, please correct me in the chat right here.
Okay.
He's a Roebling guy. I can tell you that.
Okay. There's so many engineers' names that are associated with every bridge. You've got the people that are out there actually constructing the bridge, and then you've got engineers all over the place. And I apologize to engineers. I don't mean that as a slight. They're absolutely needed. But one of the things that I've been doing in my research for this, to get as much information on the 100 years as possible, is researching a lot of the engineers, taking trips to RPI archives and whatever. So the names are familiar, but I don't know specifically what they did. But I'd love for whoever asked that question to share whatever they know with me. That would be great.
Here is more of a comment than a question. I don't see another bridge crossing the Hudson near the Bear Mountain. I saw one when I was there. What is the name of the other bridge?
Which
Isn't there another bridge like right over by Bear Mountain, a smaller one?
There isn't. It doesn't cross the Hudson.
Oh, okay.
That's, I think what they're talking about, Lynn, is that 9W bridge, that arch bridge. The Popolopan actually has the 9W arch bridge. It has the Popolopan Creek suspension bridge that's for pedestrians only, that the Bridge Authority built back in the early 2000s as, it had some connection to the battle at Fort Clinton and Fort Montgomery. And that was put up then. And there's that little low railroad bridge. But the bridges that are close by, the Bear Mountain was the very first bridge south of Albany, vehicular bridge that was built to cross the Hudson. It was because of its length of the suspended span, it became the beginning of a whole boom in bridge building. So even though it was the longest suspended span, it only had that title for about 9 months. The Mid-Hudson was built in 1930, opened in 1930, the George Washington in 32. Yeah, at that part of the Hudson, that's the only one.
I'm going on vacation to New Paltz this weekend, and I'm going to go over that Rip Van Winkle Bridge. I didn't realize that's what it's called. That's amazing.
The Rip Van Winkle, it goes from Catskill to Hudson.
Yeah, I'm going to Thomas Cole's house, which is up there.
Yes, come up there. Anybody that's listening, come up in September 16th. We're having our Skywalk Arts Festival. The Rip Van Winkle Bridge carries the Skywalk, the Hudson River Skywalk, from Thomas Cole over to Alana. And it's a beautiful area, and we have a really fun festival that's all local artists, landscape artists and photographers. So it's a great time. So that's a great time to be up there. All kinds of stuff going on.
Speaking of other things besides bridges, can you talk a little bit about the zoo? I went and walked through that zoo, and it was amazing over there, right by the bridge, under the bridge, kind of.
It is. It's right there. The park and the bridge have had a long history, of working together. The New York State Park System is celebrating its centennial in 1924 also. Bear Mountain Park was not a state park when it opened, but it became part of the state system. The zoo is all animals from the area. So you won't find any, any elephants or anything like that in there, but you definitely have the bears and all of everything that's indigenous to Bear Mountain. But the zoo is there. There's a trailside museum. The overlook is incredible. It's just such a historic area. It's beautiful. It's
so easy to take beautiful pictures of the bridge with that overlook. Like every picture looks so good. Yeah. Yeah, and it's a beautiful drive too. We're really trying to sell you guys into this thing.
One of the other things that we're working on, and we should have it set up for this September, is and you will be able to bring it up on your phone. And as you walk across the bridge, you'll get the information about all the different pieces of things and little snippet videos. So it should be a fun thing to do.
All right, we have one last question. I think this is a good place to end it too. The question was, will this webinar be added to the Roebling road trips? And yes, I did drop in the chat. All of these programs are recorded and we put them up on the museum's YouTube as soon as I edit them. So it might be a week or two, but when we do release the new ones, we usually do a post on Facebook to get people. And if we're doing an e-blast, we usually add that in there too. But definitely check out our YouTube if you want to go back in time and watch any of the other ones. And again, if you have ideas for future Roebling road trips, be in touch. Thank you so much, Kathy. This was fantastic. And I'm so